Thanks, Rob. It's an honor to be here, and thank you to the Artcraft for inviting me. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so before I begin, I do want to start with a little bit of a disclaimer. This talk is not going to contain any major spoilers, because you really can't assume that everybody's seen a movie, no matter how popular you think it is. And part of the fun of seeing a Hitchcock film for the first time is not knowing what's going to happen. But I will address a couple of minor plot points just because that is a little bit unavoidable when you're discussing a film. So first of all, I'd like to start with a quote from the master of suspense himself, which is, "There's no terror in the bang, only in the anticipation of it." And I think that quote perfectly encapsulates the essence of suspense and the way Hitchcock used it. So what is suspense? Suspense, as applied in movies, can promote a bunch of different things. It can deal with intense excitement, a high level of anticipation, ultra-heightened expectation, uncertainty, anxiety, or nerve-wracking tension, or all of them. And so the way suspense affects your brain, when you watch a great movie, you can get lost in the story, right? Everything just disappears around you. You get really sucked in. Well, in 2015, a study at Georgia Tech found evidence that actually supports this idea that people can be transported into a narrative. So in the study, participants lay in an MRI machine and watch scenes from 10 suspenseful movies, including Hitchcock's North by Northwest and The Man Who Knew Too Much. And as the movies played in the center of the screen, a flashing checkerboard pattern appeared around the edges. And so this checkerboard pattern was used because the nerve cells in the calcarine sulcus, which is the part of the brain that receives and processes most visual information, those nerve endings typically are attracted to that type of movement with the checkerboard. So by presenting those checkerboards at all times, the researchers tested the idea that suspense temporarily suppresses the nerve cell's usual response. So the researchers discovered a fluctuation of brain activity in the calcarine sulcus. So when suspense grew, the brain activity in the outer visual processing areas of the brain decreased, and the activity in the central processing areas increased. So what that means is during the most suspenseful moments of a scene, the participants focused on the movie and subconsciously ignored the outer checkerboards. And the brain narrowed the participants' attention, making them focus on the center of the screen and the story. So, for example, during the famous North by Northwest scene where Cary Grant is running from the airplane, the brain ignored the checkerboards and narrowed its visual focus as the airplane swoops down on him as he's running. And when he hides in the cornfield and the suspense decreased, the nerve activity in the brain reversed course and the person's attention broadened to the outside of the image. So when suspense is greatest, our brains shift activity to increase processing of the most important information and ignores the visual content that doesn't matter. So it's essentially tunnel vision. So now that we know that suspense narrows our focus to the most crucial moments of scenes, let's get into how Hitchcock uses that suspense to mess with our minds. So according to Hitchcock scholar Susan Smith, there are 3 types of suspense. There's direct suspense, where the audience is worried on their own, and they're not worried on characters' behalf. So for example, you're walking through a haunted house or a dark forest, and you're scared something will pop out at you at any moment. And then there's shared suspense, where the audience and the character are both in on what's going on. So for example, a plane's about to go down, the characters know what's going to happen, the audience knows what's going to happen. It's still anxiety-inducing for everyone. And then there's vicarious suspense, which is where the audience is aware of something that's going to happen, but the protagonists or the characters don't know. So there was another study that was done by Dr. Keith Bound at Receptive Cinema, which is a consulting firm for audience reception to films. And he showed people short 90-second clips from horror films like Quarantine, The Descent, and Silent House, and measured their sweat to find out how anxious they were in real time. And so he measured the anxiety by how long the person was experiencing that response, and also the intensity of that anxiety response. So what he found is that of the 3 types of suspense, the vicarious suspense is the one that elicits the strongest reaction from viewers. And contrary to what you might expect, the people's anxiety during a scene actually dropped once they saw the actual threat. And so what the audience really responds to is the close-up of the petrified face of the victim. So filmmakers use studies like this to see how to elicit the best response from their audiences. But still, it's not really an exact formula for everyone. Some people might have a stronger response than others because of past experiences. So you can probably guess that the vicarious suspense is Hitchcock's favorite. So an example of this, how Hitchcock uses vicarious suspense, is his bomb theory. And in an interview, Hitchcock once explained that the core element of this theory is the difference between shock and suspense. So shock happens without warning, no subtlety, and it makes the audience merely spectators for what's going on. And in order to get suspense, you provide the audience with a certain amount of information and leave the rest to their imagination. So with suspense, the audience is an active participant and we're invested in what's happening. So Hitchcock explained his bomb theory like this. So you have a couple that sits down to a meal at a restaurant. 5 seconds later, a bomb goes off. It's surprising, it's shocking, but there's no suspense there. There's no buildup. So if you want to create suspense, you have the same scene where the couple sits down to a meal and starts having their conversation. But we tell the audience that there's a bomb under the table, and it goes off in 15 minutes. So as the camera cuts between the ticking clock and the people at the table, the suspense builds. And everyday conversation the characters are having about March Madness, for example, becomes more powerful. You're sitting there practically yelling at the screen, don't talk about basketball, there's a bomb under the table. So our anxieties will be there as long as that clock is ticking away. But the bomb must never go off. Hitchcock actually regretted doing a film early in his career where the bomb did go off. And it was actually a mistake in his eyes because the audience needs a relief from that suspense. So vicarious suspense doesn't always have to be something catastrophic like a bomb. So I want to provide a little bit more of an everyday example from one of my favorite Hitchcock films, Notorious. And so in Notorious, Cary Grant needs Ingrid Bergman to spy on a group of Nazis in South America, and part of that plan is for her to win the affections of the leader, played by Claude Rains, and in order to get that crucial information. And so they suspect that the wine bottles in Claude Rains' cellar contain evidence that they need. And so in the scene you're about to see, Ingrid Bergman needs to get the key to the wine cellar, and Claude Rains has no idea what she's up to, but he almost catches her. So when you watch the clip, notice the different ways Hitchcock creates vicarious suspense through both the dialogue and the actions of the characters. There is a really good moment of heightened suspense in here, and you'll also see if Hitchcock learned his lesson and decides to add a moment of relief. So let's see what happens.
Mr. Devlin coming tonight. I don't blame anyone for being in love with the darling. I just hope that nothing will happen to give him any false impression. But within a minute. Darling.
It's not that I don't trust you, but when you're in love at my age, every man who looks at a woman is a menace. Please forgive me for even talking about it. I'm very contrite.
So as you saw there, we had both the heightened moment of suspense where Claude Rains almost finds her with the key when he starts to kiss her hands, and then the relief, which was that really epic behind-the-back hug switch thing. And also the line where he says, it's not that I don't trust you. That also adds to the suspense because it illustrates that double unawareness. He doesn't know that she's a spy, but the audience knows that she is, and she has the key. And so the irony is that he actually does have a reason not to trust her. So if you haven't seen Notorious, I highly recommend it to find out what happens next. It's one of my favorites. So I have one final concept that I would like to go over in relation to Hitchcock and using editing to create suspense. So through editing, filmmakers can create illusions of unity in time and space and make these illusions elicit emotion from the audience. So one editing technique that filmmakers use to do this is the Kuleshov effect, which was pioneered by Soviet filmmaker Lev Kuleshov in the early 20th century. So what he discovered was that a single image of an actor with an ambiguous, neutral expression on his face could convey a variety of distinct meanings in the mind of the viewer, depending on the nature of the shot that immediately comes before it. So if you take one shot and then juxtapose it with another shot, you can create a third new meaning not present in either shot by itself. So for example, here we have an actor with a neutral expression, and in the next we have a bowl of soup. And on the right, we have the exact same shot of the actor as before, but because it's paired with the soup, his expression kind of emulates and illustrates hunger. And so our next example is of a deceased person. So actually we have a, all right, cool. So it's all right, we have some technical difficulties. So if we can go back to the previous slide. Or not. All right, so there was another example there of a woman, a young woman sitting there, and so because his expression was paired with that shot, that expression looks more one of longing or lust after that woman. So it's that exact same neutral expression. So, and then Hitchcock really understood that technique, and how he could use that to create emotion. And so he and his editors mastered it. So a prime example of the Kuleshov effect is in Rear Window, because the story is told mostly through visual terms. And so the Kuleshov effect provides much of the film's drama. So a lot of the film consists of Jimmy Stewart just looking out his window, followed by what he sees and his reaction to it. So I have a couple of examples of the Kuleshov effect at work in Rear Window. So here we have Jimmy Stewart on the phone in the opening scene of the film, looking out his window, observing his neighbors. He has a neutral expression on his face, not really sure what's going to go on there. So if we pair that with an image of across the way, a young woman preparing breakfast in her underwear, his expression appears a little bit lecherous, a little bit of a peeping Tom vibe there. And so now if we take that same shot of Jimmy Stewart and pair it with one of a couple in an argument, Jimmy Stewart is expressing concern, wondering what happens next, even though it's the exact same expression as before, pairing it with that different shot, the emotion on his face looks a little bit different. So I actually did a little bit of editing on my own to present those examples, because Jimmy Stewart's reaction only matches one of those shots that's only used in the actual movie. So what is he really looking at? Well, it is the girl in her underwear making breakfast. So by using that juxtaposition, filmmakers can manipulate space and time, and as well as the audience's reaction to those images and the character. So here, we think, we can deduce that Jimmy Stewart's a little bit of a creep here. So Hitchcock used this editing style in Rear Window so well that Jimmy Stewart later claimed in an interview that he did not remember playing the role the way he saw it in the finished film. So that actress probably wasn't even there that day, or he was just looking at something completely different. So that's kind of the power of editing there. So you can see that significance of using the Kuleshov effect to craft a story to manipulate the audience's emotions. So, and that's a little bit about how suspense can affect our brains and how Hitchcock uses certain techniques to play with our minds. So now you have some things to look out for when you watch Hitchcock films this weekend and in the future, and you'll probably won't watch a Hitchcock movie the same way again. So thank you, and enjoy Hitchcock Suspense.